So while I work for the Technology Innovation Agency, as Janzi said, I do represent the NSI public funded initiatives. So this is being led by the DST, but the stakeholders involved include TIA, CSIR, HSRC, and NACI, the National Advisory Council on Innovation. So while I'm here as a TIA employee, I'm also speaking on behalf of the system. So Imran Patel, who was invited to, in fact, it was the DG of the DST that was invited. It kind of, as things go in the public sector, they kind of get cascaded down. But unfortunately, Imran couldn't be here today. He's actually addressing the South African Technology Network conference in Durban. So he couldn't be here. So it shows you there's a lot going on in this space. Just a little bit about TIA, so I won't leave it up. I won't labor it too much. But essentially, TIA is all about de-risking technology innovation for socioeconomic benefit. And the goal is to harness the outputs of science and technology to develop new industries, create jobs, and diversify the economy. I'll leave these slides with the organizers, so you're welcome to read further, especially if you want to, if you're having trouble sleeping at night. Just read these two front ones. Okay, so while we're here today, I'd like to tell you a bit about this term called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And so the World Economic Forum has been of late, so the last few years, very vocal about what this means. It's the next thing, it's the new wave. We must be there, we must catch on, we mustn't miss the boat. And they see this as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the first being predicated on steam power, water, mechanical production, etc. Second, division of labor, electricity based. And then you have electronics, ICT, automation production. And now we sit in an era where we have cyber physical systems. These are things that sort of mediate with inside machinery and crunch data at the same time as, so it's a mini computer within machinery essentially. But also what's strong within the WEF narrative is this thing about convergence. So it's about convergence of many different types of technologies, mostly digital technologies. But it's also about the convergence of the physical, digital, and biological spheres. And you're looking at technology as it influences society and the economy. But this is by no means an accepted narrative, and there have been criticisms from many quarters. Some feel that this is actually just a continuation of the current revolution, the ICT revolution. It's simply an extension of that. There's also some criticisms about that things are happening fast, but they've happened fast before. So it's by no means an accepted narrative. It's probably the dominant narrative, but there are other narratives out there as well. And I just want to do a slight detour and to talk about long-term growth. So the classical economic perspective of long-term growth that is determined by your factors of production, which is land, capital, and labor. And then you've got a small amount that is called total factor productivity, which is essentially the unaccounted residual over and above the productivity from labor and from capital. But one of the classical economists, Solo, determined that actually this residual effect actually accounts for 70% of long-run growth. So what actually underpins that contribution is essentially productivity growth, which is underpinned by technological change. Right. So, and this is demonstrated in previous paradigms where breakthroughs in technology have driven economic and social revolutions. So what I also need to say here is that for us to catch up to advanced economies, we do need to look at firstly doing our own indigenous research, but also generating absorptive capacity to absorb inbound technologies. So basically technology and technological change more specifically is important. And the reason I'm showing this, and it's don't get too hung up on the sociology stuff, but what I'm trying to show here is often the narrative out there is based on very strong technological determinism, as if, you know, the fourth industrial revolution is upon us. We must adapt, we must take advantage of this. But what this narrative lacks is agency, that we as society have our own choices to make. And the table there essentially shows you that on the one extreme you've got technological determinism, on the other extreme you've got social determinism, where the sort of middle of the road is that society and technology co-evolves and has always co-evolved together. Okay, so while the previous slide, technology is important, but technology is always located within society, and that's important. Right, so there's also, you know, going on to this, what paradigm do we choose? Why do we need to choose the World Economic Forum narrative? Because there are others. There's some work done by Converging, looking at waves of capitalist expansion based on various previous industrial revolutions. And it's predicated on these techno-economic paradigms such as the steam engine, development of railways, electricity, automobiles, microcomputers, and so on. There's also the Japanese model, which is called Society 5.0. Now, society is already, Japan is already a very advanced economy with high levels of digitalization and technological advancement. And what this paradigm speaks of is essentially allowing artificial intelligence into all avenues of society. So all, you know, society will be essentially run by artificial intelligence. There's Neil Gershenfeld, who's the guy behind Fab Labs, and he also has a different take. He thinks we're in the third digital revolution. And then we have Jeremy Rifkin. So the criticism a few slides back was from Jeremy Rifkin. And he sees a confluence of energy, transport, and communication systems. So we're in, according to him, the third industrial revolution. And then we have waves of techno-economic paradigms. It's a bit faint. So you have your first wave, which is, again, water power. The second is steam power. The third wave, electricity, and so on and so on. And see, the innovation axis essentially shows you, tries to depict the amount of disruption that such changes would have on society. And then we come to Carlota Perez, who speaks of these techno-economic paradigms again. And so you'll see that the current philosophy that we're looking at, so we're looking at the fourth industrial revolution through the lens of techno-economic paradigms. Okay. And just to go back to the origins of the fourth industrial revolution. So the fourth industrial revolution is not the original term. Germany is the most advanced industrial base in the world. What happened is that the industry leaders got together and were thinking about how do we remain the most advanced economy in the world. And they started thinking about, well, we've been through the first industrial revolution. It's all about mechanization. The second was about electrification, and we're currently in automation. So based on how the German economy and industry looks, what might the future German industry look like? And so essentially it's a German construct that they use to start thinking about in a futures way, how to remain competitive within their own paradigm And so actually what happened is that industry got together and influenced government policy, and then it spread from there. And there's been work since then on looking at what's called the Factory 4.0, and I won't go through the whole slide, but essentially it's trying to think about how the next type of factory might look like. And then you have people also trying to think about the operator 4.0 and how cobots essentially would assist workers in the factory, how you'd have connected factories. So at the moment, we sort of the operator 2 is essentially you have robotics separate from the operator. Going forward, you essentially have, again, cyber physical systems within this paradigm. But to me, this proliferation of 4.0 terminology can maybe get to be a bit ridiculous. This is not a real thing, but I mean, you can take it to the extreme. I don't necessarily prescribe to this use of 4.0 all over the place. This is just a bit of fun. But what you really need to do is look to, some of the historical initiatives launched, and starting with Germany, going on to America. The UK has their advanced manufacturing, that high value catapult program, and other countries. This is a bit old, this is 2015. But essentially, you need to look at the objectives of what each country or region wants to achieve. That's probably more important than the name. And again, it's about the rationale for the intervention. And that depends on each country, its context, what it aims to achieve, how it sees itself in the future. And so what I'm trying to get across is I don't think we should get too hung up on what it's called, even though the former Minister of Science and Technology, Naledi Pandor, has publicly stated when she was Minister of Science and Technology, she actually doesn't like the term Fourth Industrial Revolution. If you look at the structure of the South African economy, you've got large parts of the population who are unemployed, who may never be in the formal economy. How do we actually then address those the excluded people? Because you're talking about formal economy, it's also very much predicated on manufacturing and industry. But there are other areas of the economy that are important. So no one has really come up with a snappy South African name yet, but if you have some suggestions, we're very welcome to taking them. And you know, as I say, there's a lot of technobabble out there. There's this sort of techno-utopia, you know, the technologies will just flow and we'll live in this wonderful Star Trek universe. There's also techno-anxiety. So this is sometimes the narrative of certain quarters saying, well, you know, we must be fearful, we must prepare, we must ward against, we must mitigate. But what this doesn't, as I've said, what this lacks is that we have no agency. We have, as human beings, within this machine-centered narrative, we actually have choice, collectively and individually. So it's useful to think of the Fourth Industrial Revolution simply as a heuristic or a mental model to think about. So it's useful, but don't get too hung up on the name. However, having said that, I think, you know, in our context, we've got very fragile labor markets. We've got high and persistent unemployment. We have high inequality and exceeding levels of poverty. So there are fears of disruption. So as the National Planning Commission is thinking about transitioning to a low carbon future, but they're doing so in a fashion where there's just transitions, where poverty, inequality, and unemployment are not exacerbated by these changes. So I think we need to think about making these transitions in a similar fashion that doesn't exacerbate our problems, and that is inclusive, sustainable, and just. What I've shown below there is essentially on the left, it's the showing inequality, and you can see Southern Africa as a hotspot. On the right is wealth, and so we're sitting on the second lowest tier in Southern Africa. And heading towards close, what I'd just like to spend a bit of time on is just to tell you a bit about the public sector initiatives that are underway. So at the government-wide level, there is the start of a country strategy and action plan being developed. This was initiated some time ago by Cabinet. It's being led by Telecommunications and Postal Services and being supported by DST and DTI. It reports to the Presidency. And what I've done is listed the possible work streams at the moment. This is very much a draft. I don't think it's been released to the public, so I'm not going to go into too many details around that. But suffice to say that government is thinking about, if you listen to President Ramaphosa, if he talks about the economy, inevitably he'll talk about the importance of technology, innovation, to competitiveness and growth. There's also a parliamentary process, and I've listed a few things there. What we have Dan Visser from the CSR towards the back there. Hello Dan, there's Dan. And he's supporting the process, so if you have any questions, he's your man. And then moving on to science, technology and innovation. So we have a committee, as I said, led by the DST, including TIA, HSRC, NACI and CSR. And there's a few initiatives underway. First, what's being conceived is a converging technologies platform hosted by the CSR. I'll tell you a bit about that in the next slide. Also the inclusive development platform. Hot off the press is a network of outreach centers. I actually don't know too much about that. Maybe Dan, you can tell us more. But then some work on a research level is the HSRC is doing a baseline study of South African fourth industrial related activities, as well as a global literature survey looking at grey and peer-reviewed literature. Also quite exciting is an SA-EU Fourth Industrial Revolution policy dialogue. So this is essentially a companion event to the Science Forum South Africa being held in December at the CSR in Pretoria. And also there's a private professional conference organizer called Topco Media, and DST has partnered with them to participate in their initiative, which is essentially Africa-wide. But we're doing the DST is doing all of this supported by its agencies to feed into the narrative in the new white paper in science, technology and innovation. We also need greater coordination between government and industry, development of sector plans. And so it all fits into the DST's efforts to develop a new decadal plan based on the white paper, as well as its 5-year strategic planning cycle as well. This is a depiction of the Converging Technologies platform. So, as I've said, the WEF narrative is useful to start thinking about how technology areas might start to converge. And so the DST has had historical investments in a few areas, technology areas of the fourth industrial revolution. So this platform essentially would seek to bring those together. So you've got photonics, there's synthetic biology, so that's the biotechnology, was called biotechnology initially, now it's bioeconomy related, so it's more industry focused. There's nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, Internet of Things, etc. So the idea is to put these all together and influence the system towards pulling together towards a common goal. And just a bit more about the Converging Technologies platform. It's to leverage off historical investments and build deeper capabilities. So you're talking, there's often criticism about the science system is that we've got too little money and we're trying to spread it over too many initiatives. And I'm getting the feeling that that's maybe starting to change, that we actually need to be more selective and invest more in less areas. Otherwise you have a whole lot of suboptimal interventions. And then the inclusive development platform essentially is to try and move away from a technology-centric approach such that society, and other drivers become central, so that it's not a technology push type approach, which works in some sectors, but perhaps not in all sectors and all areas of the economy, especially for South Africa as a developmental state. So it's essentially to nudge and guide what happens in the Converging Technologies platform. And so the next steps is there's a fleshing out process where the CSR, as the project manager for these two initiatives, would define what this all means, and then also consult with the science and technology sector, as well as with business and industry. Then also an audit and integration of the various DST initiatives. So what you have is you'll have, let's say, funded contracts in specific areas, and so there may not be contractually space to start collaborating with other initiatives, and that all needs to be understood and unpacked, and how's this all going to work. And then you throw a stick and you'll hit something that has fourth industrial revolution in it. There's so many initiatives out there. These are just two recent ones that I've come across. This Industrie forum is being driven by a company called Heuristic, which is in Gauteng. And then, unbeknownst to us, we read in the papers about a week ago, it was Telkom and certain universities that are going to just develop this fourth industrial revolution agenda. And I also read in yesterday's papers, Imran Valodia, he had a 10-point plan for the economy, and one of the last sentences is that we need to develop a strategy within 3 months. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and some of the issues that it's very disconnected. There's a lot going on. Not that everyone needs to be involved in everyone else's business, but at the moment I see quite a coordination failure. If not coordination, simply information sharing. And I think that is important at various levels, whether you're talking the government-wide level, whether you're talking about the NSI level, whether you're talking about the project level, so HSRC is doing some work. I know that TIPS is also doing some work. And then Prof. Roberts from UJ at the Industrial Development Think Tank, they're also doing some work. But are they talking to each other? This is at the practitioner and researcher level. I don't think this is happening. And just to wrap up a few concluding remarks. It's not about the name. What it's called is largely irrelevant, I think. It's also not only about the technology. Technology is important, but technology is socially embedded, and so it's important to bear that in mind. Ultimately, it is about what we as South Africa want to achieve. The name comes afterwards, really. There's really a proliferation, explosion of activities and initiatives. Some are very opportunistic, some are maybe not sustainable. So it's useful to have, to talk about these things, but then what do we do afterwards? And so what process does, for example, this forum plug into afterwards? There's many public sector initiatives on the go. And what we do need is more cooperation, partnerships, and information sharing at many levels. Also, between the public and private sector. There's also Labour's thinking a lot about this. I often see programs or initiatives where they're starting to think about what the implications are on the workplace and on the labour force. And my second to last slide is just a punt. So you may or may not know that the draft white paper has been approved for circulation by Cabinet yesterday. So the Minister of Science and Technology has launched this and invited comments within 30 days. She'll also have a summit, I think, on the 9th of November. And I guess if you're in the system, you get an invite. Otherwise, bug the comms people at the DST if you think you should be involved. So it also, the fourth industrial revolution features quite strongly in the white paper, so I would urge you to go to the DSD website and download a copy, and then send your comments in. Those are some brief thoughts about the fourth industrial revolution, or whatever we want to call it. I just want to acknowledge contributions from HSRC, DSD, CSR, and NACI, and I thank you.